Hey everybody, welcome to On Your Mental. This week we're starting things off a little bit differently. I'm not going to do the usual intro or anything like that, and that's because the subject matter of this episode is going to be a little bit more sensitive, and so I just want to be mindful, be respectful of the entire situation. So today is May 25th, right?
Correct.
Yes, everybody checking their That's cool. Today's May 25th, and just yesterday it was May 24th, where there was a mass shooting in the United States that took the lives of, I believe it's now up to 19 kids that they counted, between the grades of 2 and 4. So that's very young. That would be, like, what is that, like 7 to 11 years old at most?
Yeah.
Which is awful, terrible. And it's not the first thing like this that's happened this year. And it feels like this continues to happen again and again. And it's feeling like we're almost desensitized to it at points. But us being here in Canada gives us a different perspective on the matter, because it's not happening here in our country. It's happening in our neighbor country. But it still makes it to us, and it still makes us think about it and wonder how things could be better. So that's going to be the point of this conversation, and we're trying to look at this from a policy issue. We're not going to be focusing on the event itself, but we do want to start by just kind of paying respect and condolences to families who were affected by this. Because it is terrible, terrible news to hear about. And it makes you think, like, I'm an only child, so I don't have siblings or anything. But if I had a younger brother, younger sister that went to school and didn't come home, that's fucked up. You shouldn't have to worry about going to school. Not once in my time going to school did I think there's a chance that I'm not coming home. You know, that wasn't a thought. So it's sad that there's a country like the United States that lives in a space like this, where it can happen. Not that it can't happen anywhere else, but we're going to talk about what happens in the U.S. So anyways, thank you to David and Nathan for coming in today to talk with us about this. And this is just us sharing our thoughts on a few things. And I'm going to start things off right away. We'll jump right into it. We're going to talk about how we feel about the right to bear arms in the United States. I'll share a first thought of my own, and it ties in a little bit to like open carry, and I guess the idea of how I would react to seeing a weapon. In my head, if I was walking out on the street and I saw somebody with a gun, my first thought is run, call the cops. There are parts of the United States where you look at that and go, oh, they're just carrying a gun.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're not gonna, like, that's so ingrained in the society to a point where it's almost okay to see that. And that, to me, can kind of alleviate the ability to see a red flag, perhaps, and go, oh, shit, that's not normal. I should be safe right now. What do y'all think about the right to bear arms in any circumstance other than, say, sport, hunting, whatever it might be, going to a gun range, stuff like that?
I really don't see any reason to have a gun other than hunting or going to the gun range.
Going to war.
Yeah, like,
you know, war
why?
itself is a terrible thing too, but
like, I don't know. I think it's interesting because you think about, like, oh, they're so, like, they think about, like, I need it to protect myself. But then it's like, if you know that someone else has a gun, then yeah, you kind of feel like you should probably have a gun too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because you don't know what the other person's going to do.
And it, like, builds on itself then too.
Yeah, it's like kind of like the prisoner's dilemma. Sort of like where, like, you feel like you have to have it because someone else has it, and there's, like, you're just fighting with that problem in itself.
Yeah, I was thinking too, it's like when you're saying that argument of, and that's one that comes up all the time, of why to keep guns in the United States is for protection, right? Protection from another person with a gun. If you didn't have a gun, what do you need to protect yourself from?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What are you thinking?
I mean, like, if there's someone also just breaking into your house, let's say with a bat, you definitely feel more comfortable with a gun. Mm-hmm. But I'm just trying to play devil's advocate there.
But I thought that way too. You're allowed to say that
I know,
guns are okay in some circumstances.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, like, think of, because they've always had guns, right? Americans have always had guns. So
Was it the Second Amendment you said?
Yeah. So, like, obviously, like, there's, like, the political aspect of things, right? Like, historically, the founding fathers I know, like, us Canadians, we might not be as familiar with the Constitution.
I'm not
right?
at all.
I'm sure. And it's complicated, right? There's a lot of different variables and a lot of different factors that's built into it when it comes down to, like, legislation and the laws around it, right? ultimately, like, I think fundamentally the right to bear arms is, in a political standpoint, something that's going to be engraved in American history and Americans itself, right? That's part of the society. You can't take that away from them,
I don't think
right?
it's going away.
It's even if you wanted to, it's just not a feasible option for that to actually occur. In terms of people thinking, obviously, like with what everyone has said here, right? And you make a good point about the prisoner's dilemma, and that kind of concept is the biggest response as to why people carry guns is, I want to feel safe and protected myself. But why would that be necessary if there were no guns, right? But the component of taking that away isn't a possibility, right? That's not a realm in reality. So I think, yes, we can always imagine a world where there's no guns and there's less violence, right? Ultimately, that's the end goal. But if you have guns, what can we do to actually make that a sustainable practice, right? Ultimately, and then, like, if you don't have the right to carry arms, and the thing is, like, a big scary thing is there's a lot of concealed like carry permits, right? I don't know if you guys saw, but the governor of Texas, Mr. Abbott, tweeted like a month or two ago. He's like, everyone should have the right to bear arms. No permits necessary. No training necessary. And to me, like, to fathom that is really unrealistic, because the legal drinking age in Canada is 18. The legal drinking age
19,
in the U.S.
yeah.
19, sorry,
Yeah.
19, and the legal drinking age here in the U.S. is 21.
Yeah.
But you can legally own a gun at
At
18.
18, yeah.
Insane.
So, and something that has the capability of doing what it does is crazy. And for that to exist, I think is the key issue, right? And
Yeah.
and rains falls down on a lot of the other problems that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah,
Totally going off topic here, but have you guys ever shot a gun?
I've
Yeah.
not.
I have, yeah.
I'm interested in it though. That's the thing too. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not totally like, oh, guns are terrible. We should never
Yeah,
use
yeah,
guns.
no, like, I get the appeal, like, it's fun,
Mhm.
but like in terms of like walking around with a gun, like, I don't feel necessary, but like I
Yeah.
totally get why people like guns, like, in that aspect. Like, it's fun to shoot a gun or whatever. But it, like, I remember when I tried it, it's like kind of terrifying to think, like, if it wasn't a target dummy, like, if that's a person, like,
Yeah.
like just one bullet and like that's it.
It's really hard to watch some of these videos that come out. For example, after the Buffalo shooting, that was brutal, because then it really makes you realize how easy it is to take a life with a weapon like a gun. It's scary, and I don't feel like it has a place out in public. I think that's why I brought up like open carry earlier, is to your point, Cabs, of having a gun in your home to defend yourself against, let's say, a robbery. I kind of get that.
Right.
I understand that. Like, that's defending your home. To me, it's like, as soon as it leaves the privacy of your home, why the fuck is there a gun anywhere other than even like near a police officer? You know what I mean? And that's a whole other conversation itself too. I mean, certain armed officers like maybe shouldn't have weapons too, you know, whatever it might be. But
yeah, no, I agree with that. It shouldn't, I feel like, it shouldn't be leaving the home.
yeah.
I don't think there would be a reason to.
Yeah, like I saw. Do you guys have you guys seen cart narcs before?
No.
Oh yeah.
So basically, they're like guys that, like, if you don't push your shopping cart back into the thing, they
hassle
throw
you.
they hassle you. They'll put like a magnet on your car.
Oh yeah.
And then the one, he was like in Texas, and then he's telling the guy, "Oh, go put it back." And then the guy's like, "No, like, fuck off." And then he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna put this magnet on your car." And then as he does it, the guy whips out a gun and like cocks it. And then obviously the guy walks away, and and just so happens there's a cop nearby. And then he goes to talk to the cops, and then in the end, it was like, oh, well, he's kind of allowed to have the gun, so...
What the fuck? Like,
yes. Like, that was kind of like the gist of the video, but, like, when I watched it, I'm like, that's insane. Like, the guy's, like, obviously he's, like, harassing the guy, but to, like, go to the extent of, instead of, I don't know, trying to talk or whatever, he, like, goes to, and, like, goes, like, 0 to 100 pretty much.
Immediate response.
Yeah, immediate response is pull the gun to get him to leave.
And that just doesn't happen here. That can't happen here.
Yeah,
and so
like,
that's
it
exactly
literally
your
can't,
point.
yeah.
Like, it's so ingrained.
Like, it's a big thing. It's a liability, right? Like, and I think like a good example of this would be that I'm not sure how close you guys followed it, but with the case with Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
So he was walking down the street with an M16.
Yeah.
Right. I believe it's an M16. Correct me if I'm wrong, but and the reason his defense was the reason why he shot the people he shot was because they looked like they pointed a gun at him, right? But if you look at that equation, look at what happened, right? If there were no guns in that and there was no open carry, what would that look like? Right?
Nobody's getting shot.
No one's like, sure, like you like people make the arguments that if they didn't have a gun, they would use a knife, a car, whatever it is, any other form of mechanism to create violence, right? But that's not sustainable for what we've seen so far in the past weekend, right? All these mass shootings are created because there's so much access and so much kind of availability to what we see in the US that's happening, right?
The
like with that example.
You can't ignore stats on this kind of thing. They'll show, there's a million graphs you can go look at for this shit. The number of mass shootings that occur compared to the number of guns that are available in a given country is directly correlated. The more guns, the more mass shootings you have. And so there's this graph that I saw just today, and it was showing how the US is right up top here in the top right corner because they have the most guns, the most mass shootings. Every other country is down here in this bottom left little range. Some are higher than others, sure, but none of them come anywhere close to what the US has going on. And so it just blows me away that this stuff, but your point though, and this is what we're going to talk about, and I'm not getting ahead of ourselves, but we'll get into it in a moment here, is what can you do if you couldn't subtract guns from the equation? What are some other ways that we can look at it to make this kind of thing better? We're brushing on one of the things, for example, like the idea of not having open carry be a thing. Like that could be something that you could look at and at least make it alarming to see a weapon out in public. That could like kind of swing that ballot a little bit. But we'll get into it in a second. I'll preface another thing too. We're going to talk a little bit about mental health because this is a mental health podcast. We talk about that a fair bit. And as much as like we're at no point here we're going to talk about the names of the people who committed these mass shootings. But imagine if these people grew up differently, had different support systems around them, had different help. Maybe they would not do the things they did. Who knows? Maybe they're just so far gone that there's no chance, right? But I don't know anybody who would ever think in their right mind to shoot someone else. So there's got to be some level of like support mental health wise does equate to not going that far.
I would think so, because when you get down to the root problem, it's not the gun, it's this person's mindset, right? It's this person made the decision to go out and kill people. The gun didn't like take
the gun
away,
didn't move.
You take away the gun, the hatred for whatever reason is still there.
Yeah, I guess like the one thing you could think about is like, I guess if they didn't have guns, but they really wanted to carry out this act, I guess they would find some other way.
That's like what?
Yeah, like it's exactly what David said. So I guess in that sense,
I'm assuming the result would be less deadly.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I would imagine.
But there would still be something, right?
Yeah.
And then there's always that argument too of, well, couldn't they just illegally get guns? You know, I mean, sure, fucking maybe, you know.
Yeah, there's you can go about like there's a million what ifs and buts, right, that you can look at these scenarios with, and I think like if you split this off into sections, like one is like that, how do we prevent this from happening, right? And I think this is what this conversation actually tackles is what is at the root of these problems, right, and what's causing this. Like, looking at the Buffalo shooting, right? I don't know if you guys read, but the killer did post a significant and in-depth manifesto on the reason why he did this. And a lot of it was disgusting because it's surrounded out racism, right? And the hatred for that community. So looking at that, like, yes, the points that guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? That's a common argument that people make, that taking guns away won't solve the problem because they'll find another way to do it, right? So while that is one significant aspect of that conversation, I do feel like ultimately, if these people are so infested with that kind of anger and that hatred, and whatever they're going through, right? Like, we don't know what their life looks like and what their background looks like, and if that help is necessary. But ultimately, like, a big part is the American health system is not up to standard as to what the support needs to be provided for, right?
There's when I went to school for health sciences, right? And there's a thing called upstream approaches and downstream approaches. And this applies to not just health sciences. I'm sure that you even learned about this in school. It's a method of problem solving and actually getting to the root of the issue. So we'll talk about that. To go over for our audience listening and watching everything, downstream approaches are things that are kind of like reactionary approaches to solving a problem. Upstream approaches are things that get to the root of the problem because it's coming down the stream to you where the problem occurs. So you're getting rid of things before they end up happening. To use this as an example, we're talking about policy changes. We're talking about healthcare support. We're talking about mental health support. When you change those and tweak them to a place where you can help youth not get to a point where they're thinking the best choice for them is to go and kill people, that can alleviate the problem. The tricky thing with a upstream approach like that is that the resolution isn't obvious necessarily. It can be a little bit hazy as to like, is this going to work? But when it does, it really fucking works. When you go downstream and you do things like make a gun ban, right? You get this reaction to that there might first of all be resistance, but on top of that, then what's next? What changes? Do people get more access to illegal guns? Do people do something differently, right? And that doesn't necessarily alleviate the problem. Even things like eliminating open carry, that still isn't perfect, but they're little things that do help, right? It's not the best solution. That mind state issue that we're talking about, that doesn't get alleviated by eliminating open carry. It just changes some aspect of what you're dealing with. So the best solution combines both, right? You look at upstream and downstream approaches to these kinds of things. But we're going to talk a little bit about upstream approaches, I think, in this next question here. Let's talk about healthcare first, actually, since we've talked a lot about just kind of how we feel about guns and that kind of thing. Let's talk about access to mental health care for a moment. I'll share another stat that I saw when researching a little bit briefly after seeing this happen yesterday. There was a stat for the recommended number of school psychiatrists available to students, a ratio, right? The recommended ratio is 1 school psychiatrist to 500 students. Not a single state in the United States has that ratio, not one. Some are close. Some are like 1 to 520, or like around that kind of range. Texas was 1 to 2,400, 2,700 students. So the care isn't there. Like the presence within schools is not there for these students to have someone to reach out to, for people to be looking at these students and checking in with them, being able to see those warning signs and know like that's someone who I need to talk to. That's not there. The infrastructure isn't there. At least those jobs haven't been made or prioritized for people going to school for this sort of thing, which they're passionate about. They want to help people, right? Put them in these places, put them in jobs like this, and that could maybe help. So that's one example. But what do all of you think are some of the reasons that are maybe those root causes to gun violence in the United States?
I don't think we realize like how big, like population wise, like America is
Huge
compared to us. Like I get why that stat is the way it is. Like what is it, like all of California has more than all of the state of California has a bigger population than Canada or something like that.
Is it?
I don't know, or something crazy like that. I think.
Let's look it up. Let's fact check state.
It's pretty nuts.
I mean, well, like we're 10% of what the population the US is, right? Like
Yeah.
they're what, 350, 360 million strong. We're what, 30, 34, 35, 36, something like that.
California has more people than Canada.
Wow.
They have a population of 39.6 million. We have a total population of 36.3 million. That was December 13th, 2021.
Yeah, so just imagine
One
like,
state is more than us.
State
Yeah.
is more than all of Canada. So like I get why it's
Yeah, like if Canada had that type of population, would we have the same?
That's
But if we had guns,
Yeah.
then
Or-
would we have would we
yeah.
have the same problem?
I think like you bring up a point like part there, right? Like it's not just one thing, right?
Right,
Like
yeah.
yes, like there are multiple conversations involved in it. Like whether a school counselor would have seen the signs, right, to prevent this. Maybe you don't know, right? But I think the biggest thing is with why we've been touch base there is that having that infrastructure to make students feel that this is a place of like safe like haven for them, right? Obviously, we don't know what that individual was feeling when he did commit these acts, right? But I do feel like based off research and what has been found in the past, is that a lot of these people are feeling alone and isolated from the world, right? Whether that's acts of bullying, whether it's home issues, right? The love and attention does play a big role into how they feel about their lives. And having that infrastructure is that kind of a means of preventing that kind of feeling from taking over, right? And taking that to the next level, feeling that, you know, at home sucks, at school sucks, my life sucks, right? And having that negative impression is, I think, a huge thing when it comes to mental health for a lot of people, like especially the younger audiences, like, you know, high school, middle school, where like mainstream media like glorifies a lot of the things around, right? And like, I'm sure, like, just as Ruben and all of us, right, we love playing Call of Duty, right? We love GTA, right? But when you start formulating all of these things together and they start looking at what they find enjoyable, they take that into real life, right? They bring that with them. So I feel like your point regarding just having that framework and that infrastructure to isolate that difference is huge, because that's how you kind of tackle that issue at its core, right? How can we create these people, like, how can we create that sense of community and that sense of like inclusivity for that?
That's a good point. Did you have anything that you want to say? I thought you were
can't disagree with
no,
that.
no.
Because I use it wrong.
Hey, thank you. There we go. Podcast done. Yeah, I think that you make a very important point there, because almost every, I think, scenario where you deal with shootings around any part of the world, it's coming from a person who does feel or describe themselves as isolated, or like see a problem that they think that like they need to take care of, you know what I mean? Like that kind of sick, fucked up shit. But there's a part of it that's sad, you know, to have some humanity in this, some empathy. And it's hard to have empathy with a killer. That's not what I'm saying here, right? They've done it. But to have empathy for the people who are at a place where they're thinking of doing something like this, if they just had the help, maybe they wouldn't. You know, if they had someone to talk to, maybe they wouldn't go ahead with these things. You can say that about all kinds of mental health issues. People take their own lives. If they had just had someone to talk to about this, if that had been something people knew about, maybe they wouldn't do these things, right? You can have this kind of conversation about so many issues, but I think it applies to this too. What are some other things that y'all can think of that would maybe be root causes to this? I mean, mental health, I think, is a huge pillar. But what about things like policy, stuff like that? Do you think that there are some root changes that, like, if you had a magic wand you could wave and correct something, what would you do?
What is the minimum age that you're able to buy a gun?
Say it was 18, was it?
So the problem,
18.
I feel like one of the key issues I'll bring up just before you answer that is that the problem is every state is different.
Yeah.
Right.
Every state is like its own country with
That's
different
true,
laws, with different like and so just to, like, you know, like, it could be
That's
18,
crazy.
it could be 19, it could be 20, and it's crazy how it's like that because like every state has their own kind of way and things of doing stuff, but yeah, it's very up and down, right? So,
So most of them are different then?
I mean, like, I think like like you can find it like 18 because like realistically you can just drive out of the state. You know,
right.
my like New York is very strict on gun laws.
Yeah.
But then why not just drive to Texas?
Right.
Raise up the age.
I
mean, like, obviously it's going to be extremely difficult when you've got that many states.
Because that's the thing too, is you make a change, but what's there is already there. You know what I mean? Like, if you said, okay, countrywide, 21 is now the legal age to possess a firearm. Everybody who currently owns one, are they going to turn theirs in? No.
Well, I mean, I would think they would have the technology to be like, hey, you got to turn yours in by this time because we know you have a gun because it's registered.
If it's registered, right.
If it's registered. If it's not registered, then then
that's illegal. Yeah.
And you can't really do anything about that. But I feel like they have the means, like, at this point, with this many mass shootings over such a frequent, or it's a small period of time, that should be like something of a thought of a solution to take upon, you know, to make it, maybe, like, as difficult as it sounds, make it a countrywide thing, to have the minimum gun age at 21.
If they can do it for drinking, why can't they do it for guns?
Exactly. So I feel like I don't know why this conversation has taken so long. Like, starting from Sandy Hooks, right? Like that was
10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's been a decade. And I was talking to Ruben as well as earlier on this because we were kind of having a discussion, but there was a Senator Murray, I believe is his name. He made a video, like there was a clip of him on the Senate floor, literally begging to the politicians, right? Like, why is this still happening? Like, what, you guys are elected into power. Why is nothing changing? Like, why do we see this every weekend, right? And ultimately, politics is the biggest reason as to why these changes take so long to happen and don't happen ultimately. But I'll bring up one of the things I read about and that my friends and I talked about, where it's a bill called HR1.
These are your friends in law.
Yeah, so HR8 is a bill that's making its way through the Senate, right? It's passed so far through the Senate, like to the House, it needs to go all the way steps up. And I get that, like, laws are complicated, laws take time to address, especially on a federal level, right? Where obviously state issues don't work at this, like we can currently see as evidently. But this bill was introduced, if I recall correctly, February of last year, right? And at this point right now, it's about 30% through until it's actually legal. And the only thing that this bill does is it enforces private gun sales and all gun sales to go through a company, like a gun license shop, anything legally and like owned, like that makes them do a background check on the person buying it. So that way guns can't be privately sold without any due diligence.
Because there are places I've heard of, like conventions for like arms shows and stuff like that, where you can walk in cash in hand and you just pay cash, you walk away with a gun. There's no check needed in some scenarios.
Like ID and that's it.
Yeah.
Right? So like it's like things like that, like even at a fundamental basis where you would think that you would need this already, right? Like to get a driver license, how many tests do you need to do, right?
Right.
Before you can get behind a 6,000 pound vehicle, right?
Yeah.
And potentially kill one person, two, three people, right? I don't understand. Like the biggest problem I feel like that is existent in within the political system of the U.S. is that these changes take so long, and there's like even so-called this policy and this bill is a bipartisan support, right? Where both the Republicans and Democrats come together, right? And agree once in a blue moon on something that's important, right? But there are still opposing members. So I guess like really my questions to you guys is, why do you think something at such a fundamental level is so often disagreed upon? Like, does that take away your Second Amendment to arm yourself? No. If you're a law-abiding citizen with great references and your background's clear, right, that you won't go out and commit a mass shooting, 100%, right? Like, you know, I'm not trying to take away your guns.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just, why can't we make it enforceable that the people who are getting these guns and buy these weapons are respectful owners, right? And
at least as best as you can.
Exactly. Like, yes, like there's different tiers to everything that you can look at, right? Like there's different levels. You can do fingerprint scan. You can do, you know, see, like there's a lot of systems that you can do. And the US has that budget to do so, right? Like how much do they spend on the military, right? Versus how much do they spend on mental health, right? You can look at these comparisons all day long and look at the data points that exist.
It paints a pretty clear picture.
Exactly, right? Like, but so I guess my question to you guys, like just to open up the floor a little bit is, why do you think there's such big opposition and things like this that can't happen faster?
Money. What I mean by that is in politics, right? A lot of politicians are privately funded, right? You're funded by people who are backing you to be elected into the positions that you're in, to make policy changes that benefit you. It wouldn't surprise me, and I don't know the answer to this, if some of these gun manufacturers even had their hands in the pockets of some of these politicians and are kind of saying like not to do this because that could reduce sale.
NRA, right?
Right.
It would most definitely reduce.
It would definitely reduce sale. Yeah, that's one reason why I can think of.
That's probably, I would say the same thing. The NRA's got
deep pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I saw someone, they posted like which, I guess, senator, they posted their tweet about what happened and then also posted how much the NRA has donated to them. And like it's like millions and millions of dollars, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. I don't know. Policy change is always very slow. And I feel like money has to be like the root of most of why this doesn't change. But I don't know. It makes you feel a little bit hopeless sometimes too, to like even think about this stuff. Cause like, what do you elect these people for? You know what I mean? Like what does your vote matter if at the end of the day they're getting kind of pulled and twisted in a different way? But the thing I wanted to say though is that I think that that question kind of argues against one of the main defenses against this, which is like when people say like, oh, you should take away guns, right? One of the biggest responses to that is, oh, you shouldn't take away guns. It's not the guns that kill people. We've said that even. It's not the guns that kill people. It's the people that kill people, right? They go out and do that. But do you want the person who wants to kill people to have access to guns? No. So a background check kind of alleviates that. So why wouldn't that pass? Because it is a fundamentally humane thing. It feels that way. I don't get it. I don't get it, man.
It's like these challenges, like where, like, unfortunately, the reality of with what the points you guys brought up, right? Like, money is a key contributor to these things, right? But at some point, like, you realize that you look at these politicians being funded, right? Like, they're being lobbied millions of dollars, right? In the interest of these huge manufacturers. But I guess it's hard to see that this is the majority of them, you know, like there's a majority of them that feel like, you know what I'm doing is good for the American people, right? And therefore that's why I vote against this bill, you know.
You just made me realize too, like they're winning over a certain population of people who are going to vote for them. Yeah. To stay in power and be able to make other policy changes too, because this isn't the only issue that any government faces is a question like this. If you stay in power, you get to make change around a lot of things. And so if you're able to stay in power, then all the power to you, literally, you know, like, yeah.
And I think like things like this are making people realize that, like, unfortunately, it's come to this point where, yes, dozens of children and innocent people have to die in order for people to realize we need more gun control. And I think the biggest argument I've seen online is more gun laws don't solve anything. I feel like we're not asking for more gun laws. We're just asking for better laws. Right. Yes. Right? Like, take away all the useless laws, not a problem, right? But just make more stringent laws and that actually work. Like, if you look at the historical context of firearms in the world and why I think at the very start, you brought up the point where you see the US up in the huge corner, right? With all the mass shootings, and you see all the first world countries with almost no mass shootings, right? And the reason why that is because while there is the political aspect of things that this can't happen, but every time in history that that's like a country like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, UK have gone through a mass shooting and instantly banned assault rifles or militia-styled weapons like semi-automatic, anything like that. No mass shootings. So to argue against the data point, like for that, I don't get it. Like how people can just look at that correlation and be like,
it's illogical.
People like just see the connection. They're like, yeah, no, that's not there, right? And sure, that can't happen. Like, because like realistically, if Biden tried to put that bill forward, right, would that pass through? Probably not, right? Because the way that America is formulated and on a societal fundamental level, that's not the realistic option, right? Yeah. Which is unfortunate because it would, in compared to data points, be that resolution, right? But what's the next step beyond that? Then what can we do, right?
That reminds, like, didn't we have in recent years there was a gun ban of some sort?
I think there was actually
something like that.
I think 2014,
yeah. Was that Trudeau?
Yeah, I think so. And then I remember like during that whole truck convoy, you hear stuff about, oh, he's got to lift the gun ban or whatever, but
it's crazy, man.
Yeah, like think about it, like even Canada, right? Like where it is very difficult to own a firearm. Like I've gone to the gun range myself, right? Like, and I have friends who own guns, but the process to own that is very like clear and specific as to what you can and cannot do. Right. Like you can't walk around the gun without it being locked in a case with 3 padlocks.
Really?
Right? Yeah, you can, like, and that's a handgun.
Holy shit.
That's a handgun, right? You can't have it loaded. You can't have it chambered. Your bullets have to be in a different case.
No kidding.
Because they don't want that accident to happen, right? Because there's legal gun owners, right? Yeah. And that's
those are the responsible ones.
And that's okay. Like that's what the Second Amendment is for, right? When people say like, oh, like the founding fathers wanted us to have guns. Sure, right? In that way, I agree. Like that's not our problem, right? Like yes, guns don't kill people. People.
Do
kill
you
people.
need a license to have a gun in the U.S.?
It depends on
Canada. You do, right?
Yeah, you need
that the firearm license thing.
Yeah, you definitely do.
It's a PAL. Yeah.
But in the U.S. some states you don't, or it's a statewide thing? It's
So for
a
example,
state
Texas,
regulated.
from what I understand, based off what I've researched, Texas, you don't.
I'm pretty sure you can just like walk into a Walmart in Texas.
You could, yeah, and literally buy a gun.
Yeah.
As long as you have as long as you're 18 years old and you have ID,
Yeah.
you don't need training. You don't need a certification.
It's
Right?
just so wild.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, for me at least, I don't know how you feel about this. It's hard for me to see the other side sometimes on this.
Well, just imagine, like, I could totally envision, like, let's say we lived down there, just a group of guys, nothing to do on a Saturday. Oh, let's
I'd
get a
buy
gun
a
and
gun,
then just like shoot
yeah.
cans in the
Yeah.
backyard or something, like something like silly like that. I could totally see that happening. But like I mean, I guess up here you use BB guns, but like down there you can use
get a
actual
real
guns.
And I guess that this comes back to our point of like those upstream approaches to this, right? We talked about a couple of things here. So some better mental health support in schools, having a bigger presence there would be great. Kabiria suggested the idea of having a countrywide minimum age for legal ownership of a firearm. I think that would be great. I think that makes total sense. And I don't think that it's something that takes a lot of effort to change as far as a policy goes. It's pretty clear what it would be, but the problem is with the legal system and how it proceeds in passing bills and becoming law. It's all this step-by-step red tape bullshit you got to go through so often, or it feels that way when it's like you just wish it could be as simple as someone says, okay, we're not doing this anymore. I guess that's the fun of politics, everything has to go through all this bureaucratic red tape all the time. But you all saw that clip with Steve Kerr, right?
Actually, I didn't.
No?
I didn't see it, but I heard about it. I heard it was powerful.
It's just you can see the emotion in him in the way that he's talking about this thing. But he was asking, when are we going to do something? Right. And that's, I think, David, you mentioned earlier, like maybe this is the one where people start having a serious conversation about when the hell are we going to do something. We've talked about it a few times before on this podcast, like the connectedness that social media does for the world. It can really highlight some problems, and it does just take the right thing to catch to push for some change. It sucks and it's fucking horrible that this is the thing, but maybe it is. You can hope that future generations don't have to go to school with metal detectors and armed guards at their schools, because that happens in the States too, right? That's something that's a real reality, and people are suggesting to do that in some of these other states where these things are happening, because that's going to protect them. That's going to make you feel safe. Would you feel safe walking into school back in high school and seeing an armed security guard standing at the door? No, I'm immediately threatened by the fact that there's a fucking gun in front of me. Like, that's not a good feeling. There's better ways to live, you know what I'm saying? Like, this doesn't have to be the case. But yeah.
Like I remember, like like in high school, right? You go to school. If you saw cops, right? You'd be like, whoa, like
what's
what's
going
happening,
on?
right? Like
Yeah.
I'm in a lockdown, right? Like like some shit's going down, right? But like the reality is like that's the norm for a lot of schools in the U.S., right? And I think a question, I guess, just to build off of what Ruben mentioned there, right? Like these prospects of like armed guards and having metal detectors, right, in schools, like that's not a actual response to these issues. Like I see a lot of these comments online, right, that go like, just if there's a law-abiding citizen there with their own firearm, this could never happen, right?
Just arm the teachers.
Yeah, like arm the teachers. Like, but that's not a solution, right? That doesn't prevent that issue from happening. It's a reaction to what's happening, but that's just a response, right? Yeah. And trained officers in responding to these issues are
also
getting gunned down.
Yeah.
Who says that this is like one or two guards are going to be that solution, right?
I can already imagine the response to, or like a counter argument again to that, would be, well, they should just have better training. We should train
more guns, right? More guns.
Yeah. It's just like, it's such a fucking like this circular argument of how to deal with this problem. And I mean, it's been 10 years since Sandy Hook. This is something that you learned about all the way through your school. These examples come up time and time again. When are we going to do something? When is something going to change? and it's crazy looking from outside in, right? Like you bring a fresh perspective to stuff, and you learn about that all the time in work, in school, and whatever. When you get a fresh set of eyes on something, sometimes you point out things that might have been glaringly obvious, but you were just blind to it. You know what I mean? You get a new perspective into things. And so that's why I think there's value in talking about this, even though we don't live there, right? Like maybe someone listens. I think that anybody with a platform, even if it's a small platform like this one, like maybe the right person hears something. Maybe it changes and shifts the mind of somebody who needed to hear something and realizes like, yo, there are some good points being made here. You know, there's some opportunity. But us being a mental health podcast, we talk about men's mental health typically, but this is everybody's mental health. What are some ways that you could envision improving the mental health of, let's say, kids to prevent that kind of mindset kind of building? We talked about a little bit that sense of community, feeling alone, access to school psychiatrists being present. What else do you think would be some other avenues or upstream approaches to improving this kind of stuff?
Well, I was gonna say I was thinking like in terms of like the stigma, like that's still like I think that's like the major barrier that we have here. Like I can't even imagine if I was going through something as like a young kid, like you barely even know what's going on. Like I like you wouldn't even know where to start anyways as a young kid. So I guess more education around like, you know, it's okay to say whatever you're feeling, like let people know. I think that's, yeah, I don't even know if we get taught that in school. Like,
no, definitely not. I don't think so. Like, you mean there's like stigma around like talking about mental health in general?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I guess maybe you get taught to like share your feelings. Do you? I don't even remember. Like, I'm trying to think, like in elementary school, do they tell you, you know,
use your words?
Yeah,
like that might be something you get taught, you know, like as like a young kid. But yeah, to open up about whatever you're thinking about, you know, like it'd be important to know that it's okay to have thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, even if the thoughts are not great thoughts, it's okay to have them. But if it's something that even concerns you, because I would imagine, I don't know, this isn't my mind, but I would imagine the mind of someone who ends up doing things like this, when it started out, it was probably an initial thought, right? They weren't born into the world thinking, I'm going to do this one day, right? The thought builds and it develops and it becomes an ideology and it becomes a belief, right? But if you can have a thought and recognize and like know, like let's say you did have psychiatrists in school, whatever, right? You could be like, oh, I know that this person's here. Maybe I know this is commonplace. Everybody goes to talk to this person when they're thinking something. I'll go talk, right? Having that avenue to know that you can bring things up would be important for sure. Yeah,
that makes sense. Just seeing it be more common to talk to a counselor or the school counselor. That makes it just makes it less weird, I would think. Yeah, like if you're a kid going through high school or something and you have one counselor at the school, and obviously the counselor is going to be super backed up if anyone goes to him or her.
Well, look at our school. We had 3.
True.
Yeah,
like I don't know if they're actual count, like
I think they were.
The trained counselors, yeah.
Okay, then like we had 3 for like 1,000 students.
But even then, to your point about stigma, though, when we knew that somebody was going to talk to a counselor,
actually, it's like, ooh,
it was like, oh, they're going through something, like what's going wrong, you know what I mean? Whereas if that stigma wasn't so strong, right, and because kids are vicious, you know what I mean? Like kids are pretty rough as far as, and we talked about bullying, right? That can be like a big thing. I know from our experience as kids, you could get made fun of for even going to go talk to a counselor. You know what I'm saying? But if kids knew that shit's fine, it's just you don't learn this until it's too late.
It's important to normalize these things, right? And like everywhere around the world, right? Like as kids, we don't think the same. That obviously when you get older, you understand that this is important, right? And these are topics you have. I think a big part in that is like youth outreach, right? Like I have a few buddies who work for VPD, and a lot of their roles were within outreach programs in high risk places, right? For a lot of schools, where like crime might be a little bit higher, right? And like the work they done is like, it's not even just like making it so that like you can sit in front of an audience in assembly class, right? I'm sure like everybody's in grade 10 and 11, 12, get called to the hall. You're like, oh my God, it's a free break, right?
Yeah,
you gotta sit there for an hour.
Everybody's fucking off at the top of the
exactly,
bleachers.
right? Yeah, you're at the top of the bleachers, right?
Yeah.
But it's like these guys are like playing basketball with the kids, right? Because all it takes is that for that one kid to create that connection and create that relationship with that person, right? And be like, hey, like, I'm feeling this kind of way. I've never felt this way before. At those early stages, and get that help, right? Because they're not going to be ignored if they reach out. And it's important to shift that dynamic, I feel like, and have that at an earlier stage where they have that connection and have that kind of growth and that means to do so, and not until it's too late, right? Where like Ruben, like I think you put it like really well in terms of it's all like it close transitions from one phase to the next phase, and ultimately then it becomes too late because
now
they feel like they can't back out of it now, right? Or else they're going to be made fun of, right? Whatever it is. So like we can, I know it's tough to, you can always look at this as speculation as to why this person did what they did. And it's tough because you'll never understand, right? I'm sure we'll never know, but it is conversations like such as these that allow actual meaningful change to happen is because we can acknowledge these things, right?
Yeah.
Before they happen. So
that's literally getting to the root of the problem, even within the mind of somebody who's going through stuff like this, right? Because briefly we mentioned that this applies to more than just things like shootings and choosing to go down a path like that. This applies to any kind of mental health issues, reducing the stigma around it. Exactly like you said, Nate. Like, if you feel as though it's normal and commonplace, like you said, Cabs, to go and reach out for help, or go and reach out and just talk through what the hell it is you're thinking, then you're in a better place. If you know that that's normal and you know that that's okay, it's just everybody feels like, oh, I can't bring something up. Like I'm weaker for doing it. My friends are going to make fun of me, whatever it might be, you know?
Yeah. Like, even though this stigma around mental health has been like kind of like a big topic for as long as I can remember, it still feels like, you know, it still really hasn't changed that much. I mean, I'm sure it's getting better, but it's still definitely there.
This is the thing about upstream approaches. Not only is the result kind of hazy sometime, or at least the path in which you're going to get to the end result, which is reduced stigma in this case, is kind of hazy, but progression is usually slow with upstream approaches too. You don't see overnight changes ever with these kinds of things, and reducing stigma is such a broad idea. Like, how the hell do you do that?
It's like a society. Well, it is a societal.
It's a societal
change.
shift, yeah, big time. And you'll see things like podcasts. That's a great avenue for our audience to get to a place where they feel less stigmatized about bringing things up. There have been countless times where people have reached out to us and said messages of like, oh, I feel like I can open up more. I feel like I'm part of this conversation, that kind of thing. Awesome. That's great that our audience is able to experience that. But not everybody listens to this podcast. You know what I'm saying? There have to be other avenues. But that's maybe one of the benefits of things like social media that we talked about very briefly, the negative of getting so much of this stuff in your face all the time, and it can kind of feed into whatever these bad ideas are. But the positive side of it is you sometimes are exposed to things that can help. Maybe to throw a suggestion out there of like a, not necessarily mental health, but another policy change is there's some responsibility on some of these companies, in my opinion, tech companies that maybe have their social media platforms that the algorithm is so good that it just feeds you more of the same thing that you believe in, even when that thing can be dangerous. You know what I'm saying? Like, these people find connectivity and connection in groups online sometimes, and that can feed into their belief that this horrible thing that they're planning on doing is right. You know what I'm saying?
A little bit.
A little bit. Does that make sense? But there's some responsibility, in my opinion, to filter out this kind of content. But then you get into the debate about free speech. There's so many nuances to this topic, right? There's no band-aid solution to this. There's no obvious answer. That's why even like me yesterday, when we were playing games overnight, I was talking like I was saying like, well, just get rid of guns. You know what I mean? But even just like thinking about it for a moment, that's not something you can do. The reality is it's not something you can do in the United States. It's not something that will change. But when you bring up things like what you're saying, Kabir, of older age to own firearms, that's an option. When we talk about things like introducing better mental health services, that's an option. Taking away the barrier that is private healthcare in the United States for a lot of people, that's an option, because that also increases access to things like mental health services. There's so much more we can do. But something's got to change.
And I think like while social media has that kind of burning passion into a lot of the things that we see in our life, and it does, it's where we get a lot of our outlets from, right? Like realistically, do a lot of us, especially like young adults, right? Do we read the newspaper? Not really.
No,
right? We go on Twitter and we see what's trending, right? And like, and that's the harsh reality. And I like, while there's the negative connotations towards that, I do believe that these things that are happening in the US, right? Having this media, while it is negative and while it is depressing and scary to see, it is making that change, I believe, happen for the better, for the better of the good, right? People are starting to realize that, maybe my right to own a M4, right, isn't worth it for my son to go to school and risk his life, right? Yeah. Maybe the 16 rifles I have, I don't mind giving that up to make sure my daughter gets home safely, right? Like we talk about how school is supposed to be that safe haven, and this does hit home for a lot of people, right? A lot of families, especially, where you have loved ones, that like you can get that call at any time. You're at work, you're at home, you're making dinner, and you get that call saying, hey, like there's been an incident at school, right? And we don't know what's happened, but there's shooting going on, right? And that panic and that fear and that realization that a lot of people are having, especially in the US, is making these, I at least from what I've seen so far, right, is making these legislative changes possible, because while money does influence a lot of these things, the bigger influence is people. Yeah. That's how these things happen, right? Conversations such as this, while it's on a small medium, while it's on a big platform, it's things like this that will make people want change, right? And that's ultimately how this is going to happen, is there's a unification of that collective agreement where we have to have change. And whatever that change is and whether or not it works, well, time will tell, because unfortunately, we're not future predictors. We wish you could. But and like, for example, like you brought up Steve Kerr, is that he's using that platform on a national level to hopefully make people realize that we are the only things that can make this happen, right? Beyond money, while money does give you a lot of power, like the people voting you give you the most power, right? People hold the power. The great thing about a democratic state is that ultimately what we believe in is what will come out of things. Hopefully, like, yes, there's a lot of disagreements, but I don't think that half of the US is like, after all of everything that's happened, is like, you know what, nothing needs to change. Yeah. Because it's been abundantly clear, right, at this point in time now, where you can have 50 people plus dead over a weekend, to realize like, hey, maybe now's the time, right, to make things happen. And I think like social media is that it will allow for that change.
It's a part of the catalyst that's going to lead to that change. Right? Yeah. I want to end off there. I like that. I like that how you summarize all that there, David. I really appreciate that. Yeah, there needs to be change. I'm sure change will eventually start to happen. This reminds me of a J. Cole lyric. Change is slow, always has been, always will be. But then he also talks about revolution, right? And like, people do hold the power. That's the thing. But the first revolution starts inside of you, right? Like, your shift and your like thought process to actually want to see change happen. That's the first step. After that, you start to see that kind of push its way up, right? Like, make its way to where policy change can actually happen, because that is ultimately the thing that will fix this. Because you can't just take out guns. That's not a real solution. You have to work with the parameters that you're within. Right, so I appreciate everything you said there, David. Appreciate everybody here chiming in on this. I know it's a sensitive topic. Everybody listening at home, I hope that some of these things kind of resonated with you, and maybe you've been thinking about this stuff too, and hopefully either are feeling more fortified in your belief and are feeling maybe a little more fired up, like, I do want to talk about this. I think this is worth pushing for change around. Maybe you got family in the U.S. Maybe you are in the U.S., right? A lot of our audience actually is. I think we got like 40% of our audience on TikTok is from the U.S., yeah. So maybe some of y'all are there, and maybe you're thinking now, after hearing this conversation, change does have to happen. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. I'm not going to say anything else. That's it. We'll see you next week. Peace.